My husband kept joking that he would leave me for my best friend if he ever had a chance, so I packed his bag and said, "Do it now." My husband Keith had this thing he'd say whenever my best friend Natalie came over. "If I had the chance, I'd leave you for her in a heartbeat." He'd laugh like it was the funniest thing ever. Natalie would look uncomfortable. I'd force a smile. "Just a joke," he'd say. "Don't be so sensitive." He said it at dinner parties. "Man, Natalie, if you ever get tired of your boyfriend, I'm available. You just have to get rid of my wife first." He said it when she helped us move. Natalie's so helpful. Unlike some people. "Hey, Nat, want to trade places with my wife?" He said it at my birthday party. 35 looks better on Natalie than you, babe. If she'd have me, I'd already be gone. Everyone would laugh nervously. Keith would pat my shoulder. "Relax, it's just how I joke around. You know I love you." But he kept saying it. Every single time she was around. Sometimes even when she wasn't. "Saw Natalie at the store today. Still looking good. It still would leave you for her." At Thanksgiving with my family, he announced it to everyone. "You know who should have married into this family? Natalie. She's basically perfect. Too bad she met me second." My mom looked horrified. My dad cleared his throat. My sister asked Keith if he was drunk. He laughed. "Can't a man appreciate beauty? I'm sitting right here, Keith." "Yeah, but Natalie's not. Unfortunately." I tried talking to him about it privately. "It makes me uncomfortable when you say that stuff. It makes Natalie uncomfortable too. She literally told me she doesn't want to come over anymore." Keith rolled his eyes. "She loves the attention. All women do." "She doesn't love it, Keith. She has a boyfriend. She thinks you're creepy." "I'm not creepy. I'm honest. If honesty bothers you, that's your problem." The next week, Natalie came over to help me prep for a work presentation. Keith came home early. Well, my two favorite ladies. "Natalie, have you reconsidered my offer?" "What offer?" she asked. "To run away together. Leave all this behind. Start fresh. Just you and me." She looked at me desperately. I stood up. "You know what, Keith? Let's do it." "What?" "You keep saying you'd leave me for Natalie if you had the chance. Here's your chance." He laughed nervously. "I'm kidding around." "No, you've said it 43 times in the past 6 months. I've been counting. You told my parents, you told your parents, you told our neighbors. So let's stop joking and make it real." That's when I went to our bedroom and started packing his suitcase. "What are you doing?" he called out. "Giving you what you want. Your chance with Natalie." I threw his clothes in the bag, his toiletries, his phone charger. Keith followed me, getting frantic. "Stop it. This is insane. I'm not doing anything. You're being crazy." "Crazy? You just told me you'd leave me for her. Again. So leave." I dragged the suitcase to the living room where Natalie was sitting. Frozen. "Here's his stuff, Natalie. He's all yours." Natalie stood up immediately. "I have a boyfriend, Keith. I've told you this 100 times. I'm not interested. Never have been. Never will be." "But Keith said you love the attention," I said. "He said all women love it. Is that what you think?" she asked him. "That I enjoy you making those comments? That I like you talking about leaving your wife for me?" Keith was getting red. "It's just jokes. Everyone knows that. Your wife doesn't think it's funny. I don't think it's funny. Who exactly thinks it's funny?" He didn't answer. I pushed the suitcase toward him. "Go ahead. Ask her out. This is your big chance. The one you've been talking about." He looked between us. "This is ridiculous. You're both overreacting." Natalie pulled out her phone. "Should I call Tom? Tell him you're propositioning me again?" "Again?" I asked. "He does this when you're not around too," Natalie said. "Asks me to coffee. Texts me about how much better I'd be for him. Shows up at my gym." Keith went pale. Natalie grabbed her purse and coat without saying anything else. She walked past Keith and stopped next to me for just a second. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "This isn't your fault," I told her. She squeezed my hand, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her. The sound felt loud in the quiet apartment. Keith stood there looking at the closed door like he couldn't believe what just happened. I stared at the suitcase sitting between us on the floor. His clothes were stuffed inside, some of them hanging out because I'd packed so fast. The zipper was still open. Keith turned to look at me and tried to smile. "Okay," he said. "That got a little out of hand. We're all being dramatic here." I didn't move. 43 times, Keith. That's not dramatic. That's a pattern. He waved his hand like he was brushing away smoke. "Natalie's blowing things way out of proportion. I was being friendly. She's your best friend. Of course I'm nice to her. Why were you texting her?" I asked. "Why were you showing up at her gym when I wasn't around?" Keith's face got red. "I wasn't showing up at her gym. We go to the same gym. It's not like I was stalking her. You asked her to get coffee multiple times. You told her she deserves better than Tom." His mouth opened and closed. Those texts were taken out of context. "What context makes that okay?" I asked. "You're married to me. She has a boyfriend. What context makes any of that appropriate?" Keith ran his hands through his hair. "Look, maybe I was too friendly, but Natalie's making it sound creepy when it wasn't. I just think she's cool and I wanted to be friends." I pulled out my phone. "Fine. Let's call Tom right now. You can explain to him how you were just being friendly. Tell him about all those texts. Tell him about the coffee invitations. Tell him how you keep saying you'd leave me for his girlfriend. Keith went pale again. His whole face lost color. Don't call Tom. Why not? I said. If it's all innocent, Tom should know. Right. Keith held up both hands. Okay, maybe I crossed some lines. But I never meant anything by it. I love you. You know that. Then why do you keep telling everyone you'd leave me for Natalie? He didn't have an answer. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. If you love me, why would you say that to my parents? To your parents? To our neighbors? At my birthday party? Keith looked down at his feet. I don't know. It was stupid. But it was just talk. Just talk that hurt me every single time. Just talk that made Natalie so uncomfortable she stopped coming over. Just talk that you kept saying even after I asked you to stop. He looked up at me. I'm sorry. I really am. I'll never say it again. I promise. You need to leave, I told him. What? You need to leave tonight so I can think. This is my apartment too, Keith said. His voice got louder. You can't just kick me out. Your suitcase is already packed. You can stay at your parents' house or get a hotel, but you're not staying here tonight. Keith started pacing back and forth. This is crazy. You're overreacting to some stupid comments and texts. I'm not leaving my own apartment. Then I'll leave, I said. I started walking toward the bedroom, but Keith stepped in front of me. Wait, just wait. Let's talk about this like adults. We've been talking, I said, for an hour. And you still don't get it. You harassed my best friend. You disrespected me in front of everyone we know. And you think I'm overreacting. Keith grabbed my arm. Not hard, but enough to stop me. I looked down at his hand and then up at his face. Let go of me. He dropped his hand immediately. I'm sorry. I just don't want you to leave. I don't want this marriage to end over something so stupid. It's not stupid to me, I told him. And right now, I need you to go. We went in circles for another hour. Keith argued that he had rights to the apartment. I pointed out that he'd already agreed to leave by packing his stuff. He said he'd only leave if I promised we'd talk tomorrow. I said I couldn't promise anything. He tried apologizing again, but it sounded hollow. Finally, he picked up the suitcase. Fine, I'll go. But this is ridiculous. You're throwing away our marriage because you can't take a joke. I walked to the door and opened it. Keith stood there for a minute looking at me. When I didn't say anything, he walked out. I closed the door behind him and turned the deadbolt. My hands were shaking, so hard I could barely work the lock. I leaned against the door and listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I called my sister. She answered on the second ring. What's wrong? She asked. I could hear the worry in her voice. Keith's gone. I kicked him out. Good, she said immediately. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Bring coffee. I'll bring a whole breakfast. Are you okay? I don't know. I think so. My sister was quiet for a second. You did the right thing. Call me if you need anything tonight. Okay, I mean it. Anything. Even if it's 3 in the morning. Thanks. I love you. Love you too. I hung up and looked around the apartment. It felt different already. Quieter. Emptier. I went to the bedroom and lay down on top of the covers with my clothes still on. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Keith's face when he made those comments. The way he'd laugh like it was so funny. The way everyone else would laugh too because they didn't know what else to do. I thought about all the times I'd smiled and pretended it was fine. All the times I'd told myself he didn't mean it. All the times I'd made excuses for him because it was easier than fighting. My phone buzzed around midnight. 3 texts from Keith. You're overreacting. This is insane. I'm coming home tomorrow whether you like it or not. I turned my phone face down and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. I just lay there replaying every comment, every joke, every time he'd said Natalie's name with that tone in his voice. The sun was barely up when my sister knocked on the door. I'd been awake the whole time. I opened the door and she took one look at my face. Oh, honey, she said. She was holding 2 coffee cups and a bag from the bakery down the street. She set everything on the counter and hugged me. I started crying. I couldn't help it. Everything just came out. She held me and didn't say anything. When I finally stopped, she handed me a coffee. I never liked how Keith talked about Natalie. None of us did. Why didn't anyone say anything? We did. You were there. Mom said something at Thanksgiving. Dad looked uncomfortable every time. I asked Keith if he was drunk. He just laughed it all off. I know. I should have pushed harder. I should have told you privately. I wiped my eyes. It's not your fault. It's his. My sister squeezed my shoulder. I'm glad you finally stood up to him. My phone rang around 10. Natalie's name showed up on the screen. I answered. Hey. Are you okay? I'm okay. Are you? Yeah. Tom knows everything now. I showed him all the texts. How did he take it? He wanted to drive over to Keith's parents' house and punch him. I almost let him. I laughed even though nothing was funny. Can I come over? Natalie asked. I want to show you something. Sure. She got there 20 minutes later. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying too. She sat down on the couch and pulled out her phone. I need to show you all of it. Not just what I mentioned yesterday. There's more. She handed me her phone. The messages went back months. 4 months at least. Keith asking her to get coffee. Natalie saying no. Keith asking again a week later. Natalie saying she had a boyfriend. Keith saying Tom didn't appreciate her like he would. Natalie telling him to stop. Keith saying he was just being nice. Over and over. The same pattern. I scrolled through 30 texts. Maybe more. My stomach turned. They were flirty. They were persistent. They were sent when Keith knew I'd be at work or busy with something else. Every single one came during times when he knew I wouldn't see him on his phone. I handed the phone back to Natalie. I feel sick. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I should have told you sooner. You told me when you were ready. That's what matters. Natalie wiped her eyes. I kept thinking he'd stop. That if I just ignored him, he'd get the hint. But he never did. I know. The messages made everything worse. Not just because of what they said, but because of when he sent them. Every single one was calculated. Sent when I was at work. When I was at my mom's house. When I was busy with something and wouldn't notice him on his phone. He'd planned it all out. He'd known exactly what he was doing. And he'd done it anyway. Natalie put her phone away and looked at me with red eyes. I kept hoping he'd just stop. That if I ignored him enough, he'd realize I wasn't interested and leave me alone. But he never did. I reached across the couch and squeezed her hand. This isn't your fault. You told him no. Multiple times. He chose to keep going. I know, but I should have told you sooner. I was scared you'd think I was making it up or trying to cause problems. Natalie wiped her face. You're my best friend. I didn't want to ruin your marriage over something I thought might just go away. It wouldn't have ruined my marriage. Keith ruined it himself. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at him for putting you in this position. For making you uncomfortable when you should have felt safe around us. She nodded and we sat there for a minute without talking. My sister knocked on the door around noon. She came in with her laptop bag and a determined look on her face. Okay, we're documenting everything. Every comment, every text. Every time he showed up somewhere Natalie didn't expect him. We need dates, locations, and who else was there to see it. My sister sat up at the kitchen table and opened a spreadsheet. Natalie pulled out her phone again and started reading dates off the text messages. Keith had sent the first one 4 months ago. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Natalie had responded politely. Thanks. I'm good. Hope you and my friend are well too. The next text came 3 days later. Want to grab coffee sometime? Just as friends. Natalie had ignored it. Then another one a week after that. Saw you at the gym. You looked great. Natalie had texted back asking him to stop. Keith had responded saying he was just being nice and she was reading too much into friendly conversation. The pattern continued for months. My sister typed everything into the spreadsheet with dates and exact wording. Then we moved on to the verbal comments. I remembered most of them because they'd made me so uncomfortable. Thanksgiving at my parents' house. My birthday party. The housewarming when we moved into this apartment. Dinner at Keith's parents' house where he'd said it in front of his own mother. My sister added witness names next to each entry. Mom and Dad, Keith's parents, our neighbors, co-workers who'd been at my birthday. By the time we finished, the spreadsheet had 47 entries spanning 6 months. My sister saved 3 copies to different cloud services and emailed one to herself. If you end up needing this for anything legal, you'll have it. The doorbell rang around 3 that afternoon. Then someone started pounding on the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk. It was Keith. I walked to the door but didn't open it. I need space right now. You need to stay at your parents' house. Keith pounded harder. This is my apartment too. I have rights. You can't just lock me out. I'm not locking you out. I'm asking you to give me space for a few days. Number. We're talking about this now. Open the door. My sister came and stood next to me. Go to your parents' house, Keith. She'll call you when she's ready to talk. Keith yelled something I couldn't make out and kept pounding. After 5 minutes, he finally left. I could hear his footsteps stomping down the hallway. My sister pulled out her phone. What's your landlord's number? I found it and called. The landlord answered on the 3rd ring. I explained that my husband and I were separating and I needed to know about the lease. We're both on the lease with 3 months left. One of you can buy out the other person's portion if you both agree. Or you can both stay until it ends and then go your separate ways. But I can't force either of you out without legal cause like property damage or not paying rent. So he can just show up whenever he wants. Technically, yes. Unless you get a restraining order or something legal that says he can't. I thanked her and hung up. My sister suggested changing the locks, but I wasn't sure if that was legal. My phone rang around 6. Keith's mom. I almost didn't answer, but my sister nodded at me. I picked up. Myra's voice came through sounding worried. Keith showed up here very upset. He says you kicked him out and won't talk to him. What's going on? I took a breath. Keith has been making inappropriate comments about my best friend Natalie for 6 months, telling everyone he'd leave me for her. Then I found out he's been texting her and showing up places trying to get her to go out with him, even though she has a boyfriend and told him to stop multiple times. There was silence. Then Myra laughed a little. Oh, honey. Boys will be boys. Keith was probably just trying to make you jealous. You know how men try to spice up a marriage sometimes. That's not spicing up a marriage, Myra. That's harassing my best friend and disrespecting me in front of everyone we know. Well, I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it. Keith loves you. He's devastated right now. He needs to understand what he did wrong, not have his mother make excuses for him. I hung up before she could say anything else. My sister held up her hand for a high five. That's the most backbone I've ever heard you show with Keith's family. The next morning, I called the number my coworker had given me, Colton Reese's office. I explained I needed to talk to someone about divorce. They scheduled me for that afternoon. Colton's office was in a building downtown. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with glasses and a kind face. He listened while I explained everything, the comments, the texts to Natalie, Keith's refusal to see why any of it was wrong. When I finished, Colton leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry you're going through this. Keith's behavior is definitely awful. But the good news is the divorce itself should be pretty straightforward. You've only been married 2 years. No kids. No house or major shared property beyond some furniture. He pulled out a form. First thing you need to do is separate your finances immediately. Open your own bank account. Transfer half of any joint savings. Document any shared assets like furniture or cars. Do you want to try marriage counseling first? Some people find it helpful. I shook my head. I'm done trying to fix something Keith doesn't think is broken. He still thinks everyone is overreacting. Colton nodded and made a note. Then we can move forward with filing. I'll need you to gather some documents. Marriage certificate, bank statements, any evidence of his harassment toward your friend if he tries to make this difficult. I went straight from Colton's office to the bank, opened a new account in just my name, logged into our joint account online, and transferred exactly half the savings. My phone started buzzing 10 minutes later. Keith, you're stealing from me. That's our money, I texted back. I'm protecting my half. You should do the same with yours. He called. I didn't answer. He texted again saying I was being crazy and unreasonable. I put my phone on silent. That evening, Natalie called. I told Tom everything. Showed him all the texts. He wants to drive to Keith's parents' house and punch him. How did he take it? He's mad he didn't notice sooner. I told him months ago that Keith made me uncomfortable, but I guess I downplayed it. Tom thought it was just awkwardness, not that Keith was actually trying to get me to cheat. Tom called me an hour later. Hey, I just wanted to apologize. Natalie told me everything and I feel terrible. She mentioned Keith made her uncomfortable a while back, but I didn't realize he was actively pursuing her. I thought it was just weird vibes. You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, but I should have paid more attention. Should have asked more questions when Natalie seemed uncomfortable around him. Tom paused. For what it's worth, Natalie and I both want to stay friends with you no matter what happens with your marriage. I felt my eyes get wet. That means a lot. I was worried I'd lose you both. Never. Keith's the one who screwed up here. Not you. I hung up with Tom feeling something loosen in my chest. The next morning my phone rang again. Keith's dad, Quentin. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was quieter than usual. I heard what happened. I wanted to call and say I'm disappointed in my son's behavior. I didn't know what to say for a second. That's not what I expected. Myra called me furious about you kicking Keith out. Then I talked to Keith himself and he told me his version. But I also talked to your sister and got the real story. Quentin paused. What can I do to help? I sat down on the couch. Honestly, Keith needs to understand why what he did was wrong. Not just apologize to make it go away. I know. I raised him better than this. His mother is making excuses, but I won't. If there's anything you need, you call me. We said goodbye and I felt weird about it. Keith's own dad was taking my side. 2 days later, my mom called. Your sister told me everything. Do you need to come stay with us for a while? Get away from that apartment? I'm not leaving, Mom. Keith's the one who messed up. He should be the one dealing with the inconvenience. There was a pause and then she said something that made my throat tight. I'm proud of you for standing your ground. You've always been too nice, too willing to keep the peace. It's about time you put yourself first. That weekend, Keith texted. Can we meet for coffee? Talk like adults about this? I stared at the message for a long time. My sister was over helping me sort through some of Keith's stuff he'd left behind. I showed her the text. She rolled her eyes. He wants to manipulate you in private. If you go, I'm coming with you. I texted back that I'd meet him but only in a public place and my sister would be there. His response came fast. Why does your sister need to be there? This is between us. I need support. Take it or leave it. He agreed, but I could feel his anger through the phone. We met at a coffee shop near the mall on Tuesday afternoon. Keith was already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner table with his arms crossed. My sister and I sat down across from him. He looked at her. I wanted to talk to my wife alone. I'm here for support. Start talking. Keith's jaw tightened, but he turned to me. Look, I'm sorry. I know I took the jokes too far, but you have to understand. Work has been really stressful lately, and I haven't felt appreciated at home, and sometimes My sister cut him off. Those aren't reasons to harass another woman. Those are excuses. You're deflecting. Keith's face went red. I'm trying to apologize here. You're trying to justify. There's a difference. He turned back to me. I can't do anything right, can I? You're just going to hold one mistake over my head forever. Maybe we should just get divorced if that's what you want. It wasn't one mistake, Keith. It was 6 months of you disrespecting me and Natalie. 43 times you said you'd leave me for her, plus all the texts and showing up at her gym. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. I already talked to a divorce attorney. I'm serious about ending this. Keith's face went from red to almost purple. You what? When? Last week. His name is Colton Reese. He's filing the papers? You're giving up that easily? After everything we've been through? I reminded him about every time he said he wanted to leave me. You're the one who kept saying it, Keith. I'm just making it happen. He stood up so fast his chair scraped. This is insane. You're insane. My sister stood up too. We're done here. Keith stormed out and I sat there shaking. My sister put her hand on mine. You did good. At work the next day, I must have looked terrible because 3 different people asked if I was okay. During lunch, my closest work friend Sarah pulled me aside. What's going on? You've seemed stressed for weeks. I told her everything. The comments, the texts to Natalie, the divorce. She listened and then said something that made my stomach drop. My ex-husband did something similar. Kept making comments about my younger coworker. I asked him to stop and he said I was being jealous and insecure. The comments never stopped. They just got quieter. I ended up divorcing him 2 years later. I wished I'd done it sooner. The next morning, a delivery guy showed up at my office with a huge bouquet of roses. The card said he was sorry and wanted to work on the marriage. I looked at them for about 10 seconds. Then I walked them straight to the break room and left them on the counter with a note that said free flowers. Sarah saw me do it and gave me a thumbs up. Grand gestures don't fix months of harassment. That afternoon, Colton called. The papers are ready. I'm having Keith served at his parents' house tomorrow. Are you prepared for him to react badly? I told him I was. The next day, my phone started ringing at 11 in the morning. Keith. I let it go to voicemail. He called 6 more times. Finally, I answered. You had me served at my parents' house? You blindsided me. I didn't give you a chance to fix things. We met for coffee 3 days ago. I told you exactly where things stood. You said you already talked to an attorney. I didn't think you'd actually do it. What did you think I meant, Keith? That I was bluffing? You don't get to be surprised when I do exactly what I said I would do. He was still yelling when I hung up. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from Keith's attorney. I opened it at my kitchen table with my hands shaking. The response was 10 pages long and painted me as the villain. Keith claimed I abandoned our marriage without warning, refused to work on our relationship, and turned his family and friends against him with false accusations. The last page requested that I pay half his attorney fees since I was the one who initiated the divorce. I took pictures of every page and texted them to Colton. He called me back within an hour and told me not to worry. This is standard manipulation, he said. Keith's trying to make you feel guilty and maybe scare you into backing down. We have documentation of his behavior toward Natalie going back months. His claim that you abandoned the marriage won't hold up when we show the court why you asked him to leave. I felt better after talking to Colton, but the papers still sat on my table making my stomach hurt. Natalie started calling me every other day just to check in. She'd ask how I was doing and if I needed anything. During one call, she told me she was willing to testify about Keith's harassment if the divorce got complicated. I really hope it doesn't come to that, I said. But knowing you have my back means everything. She said she felt partly responsible for not telling me about the texts sooner. I reminded her that Keith was the only one responsible for Keith's behavior. Tom sent me a text saying the same thing and added that he and Natalie wanted to take me out to dinner once things settled down. Having their support made the whole process feel less lonely. I made an appointment with a therapist named Amanda Wilcox that my insurance covered. Her office was in a small building near the library with plants in every corner and soft lighting that didn't make my head hurt. During our first session, I told her everything about Keith's comments and the divorce. She listened without interrupting and then asked me why I thought I tolerated his behavior for so long. I don't know, I said. I guess I thought it would stop if I just ignored it. She wrote something in her notebook and said we'd work on recognizing patterns where I minimized my own feelings to avoid conflict. That hit hard because I knew she was right. At our second session, Amanda gave me homework. She wanted me to write down every single time I felt uncomfortable with Keith's behavior, but stayed quiet instead of speaking up. I thought it would be maybe a page. It ended up being 3 full pages front and back. There were incidents from before we even got married. Times he made jokes about other women in front of me. Times he dismissed my feelings about his friends. Times he compared me unfavorably to his ex-girlfriend. Seeing it all written out made me realize the Natalie situation wasn't a one-time thing. It was just the latest and most obvious example of something that had been happening our entire relationship. The next Tuesday, I was home alone working on my laptop when someone knocked on the apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Keith standing there holding an empty box. I opened the door with the chain still on. You need to coordinate through the attorneys if you want to get your stuff. He pushed against the door. I just need to grab a few things real quick. This is still my apartment too. I told him he couldn't come in, but he pushed harder and the chain popped off. He walked past me into the bedroom and started going through the closet, pulling out shirts and shoes. I stood in the doorway feeling my heart pound. You can't just show up here whenever you want. He didn't even look at me. I'm getting my property. You don't get to keep me out of my own home. I backed into the living room and grabbed my phone. I called Colton from the bathroom with the door locked while Keith banged around in the bedroom. Colton answered on the second ring and I told him what was happening. He said Keith just violated the separation agreement by entering without notice and proper coordination. Stay on the phone with me until he leaves, Colton said. If he tries to get into the bathroom or threatens you in any way, I'm calling the police. Keith finally left 20 minutes later with his box of stuff. The apartment felt contaminated after he was gone. I kept looking at the broken door chain and feeling unsafe in my own home. Colton filed a motion the next morning to formalize that Keith had to schedule apartment access through the attorneys at least 48 hours in advance. He couldn't just show up whenever he felt like it anymore. The motion also requested that all exchanges of property happen with a third party present, or at the attorney offices. Colton said the judge would almost certainly approve it given what happened. Until then, he advised me to stay with family, or have someone stay with me just to be safe. My sister showed up that evening with an overnight bag and a bag of takeout. She took one look at the broken chain and asked if I was okay. I told her about Keith barging in and she got furious. We're changing the locks tomorrow, she said. Colton already told me I can legally do that since Keith moved out voluntarily. She stayed with me for 4 days, and I was grateful because I jumped every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. We got a locksmith to come out and install new deadbolts on both the front door and the bedroom door. My sister also bought me a door stopper wedge and showed me how to jam it under the door for extra security. Having her there made me feel less alone and less scared. While my sister was staying over, I started noticing Keith's social media posts. He was putting up vague stuff about how his wife didn't appreciate him and gave up on their marriage too easily. One post said something about how modern women bail at the first sign of trouble instead of working through problems. Another one talked about how he was the victim of a smear campaign. My phone started blowing up with messages from mutual friends asking what was going on. At first I thought about just staying quiet and not engaging. But then I realized I was doing the same thing I always did with Keith, staying quiet to keep the peace and protect his reputation while he controlled the narrative. I decided to tell the truth instead. When people reached out asking about the divorce, I gave them the facts. I explained that Keith spent 6 months telling everyone he'd leave me for Natalie, including at family gatherings and dinner parties. I told them about the private texts he sent her asking her to coffee and telling her she deserved better than Tom. I mentioned that he showed up at her gym even after she told him to stop. I didn't embellish or make things sound worse than they were. I just stated what actually happened. The response was overwhelming. Almost everyone said they always thought his comments were inappropriate but didn't know how to address it. Several people apologized for not speaking up when Keith made those jokes in front of them. A few said they'd stopped inviting us places because Keith's behavior toward Natalie made everyone uncomfortable. 2 of Keith's friends reached out privately with apologies. One guy named Jonathan said he thought Keith was just being crude and didn't realize Keith was actually pursuing Natalie behind my back. He felt terrible for laughing at some of the jokes and said he should have shut it down instead. The other friend said something similar. He explained that he assumed Keith's comments were just locker room talk and didn't understand the extent of the harassment. Both of them said they'd testify on my behalf if I needed them to. I thanked them and said I appreciated their honesty even though it came late. It felt validating to hear other people confirm that Keith's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable. For months he'd made me feel like I was being too sensitive. Now I had proof that other people saw exactly what I saw. Keith's posts on social media got worse over the next week. He started writing long paragraphs about how his wife turned all their friends against him with lies. One post said something about cancel culture and how nobody cares about men's side of the story anymore. Another one claimed I destroyed his reputation because I couldn't handle a little teasing. My phone kept lighting up with screenshots from friends who were seeing the posts. Each one made Keith look more unhinged than the last. I forwarded everything to Colton, who told me to keep documenting but don't respond publicly. He said Keith was basically building a case against himself by showing how unstable he was acting. I took screenshots of every single post and saved them in a folder labeled with dates and times. It felt good to have that evidence even though reading the posts made my stomach turn. The mediation session happened 2 weeks later at Colton's office. Keith showed up with his attorney, who immediately started painting me as the bad guy. She said I was vindictive for changing the locks and refusing to even consider reconciliation. She kept using words like unreasonable and cold-hearted while Keith sat there nodding along. I stayed quiet and let Colton handle it. He pulled out the printed timeline we'd made showing all 43 comments Keith made about Natalie with dates and witnesses. Then he showed the text messages Keith sent to Natalie over 4 months asking her to coffee and telling her she deserved better than Tom. He added the gym incidents where Keith showed up knowing Natalie's schedule. Keith's attorney's face went from confident to deflated in about 30 seconds. She looked at Keith like she was seeing him for the first time. The whole energy in the room shifted after that. Nobody was calling me vindictive anymore. We reached a settlement after 3 hours of back and forth. Keith would take his car and all his personal belongings. I got to keep the furniture we'd bought together and stay in the apartment until the lease ended in 3 months. We split the savings account exactly in half, which came out to about $4,000 each. Keith's attorney drew up the paperwork right there. Keith signed everything, but he stared at me the entire time with this look that was half angry and half something else I couldn't identify. His hand shook a little when he was writing his signature. I signed my parts without looking at him once. Colton reviewed everything to make sure the terms were exactly what we agreed on. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. After the mediation ended, I walked out to the parking lot to get in my car. Keith must have followed me because suddenly he was right there blocking my driver's side door. He said I ruined his entire life over nothing. That I threw away our marriage because I couldn't take a joke. That everyone would see eventually that I was the problem, not him. I looked at him standing there and felt absolutely nothing. I told him he ruined his own life by refusing to respect boundaries and treating people like they didn't matter. Then I walked around to the passenger side and got in that way. He was still talking when I started the engine and backed out of the parking space. I could see him in my rearview mirror standing there alone in the parking lot. My mom came over the next weekend to help me pack up Keith's remaining stuff that he hadn't grabbed yet. We went through the closet and found old t-shirts and a jacket he'd forgotten. In the back of his nightstand drawer, my mom pulled out a small notebook. She opened it and her face went strange. She handed it to me without saying anything. Inside, Keith had written down Natalie's work schedule for the past 3 months. He had her gym times listed by day of the week. There were notes about what coffee shop she went to on Thursdays and what grocery store she used. My skin started crawling looking at all those details written in Keith's handwriting. This wasn't casual interest or harmless jokes. This was calculated stalking behavior. I took pictures of every page before putting the notebook in the box with his other things. My mom hugged me and said she was glad I got away from him. I sent a message to Keith's parents that night. I thanked Quentin for being supportive and trying to talk sense into Keith. I explained that I really did try to make the marriage work, but I couldn't stay with someone who wouldn't admit he did anything wrong. I said I hoped they understood, even though I knew this was hard for them too. Myra responded within an hour with a message calling me cold-hearted and selfish. She said I gave up on her son when he needed support, and I would regret destroying our family. Quentin's response came the next morning. All he wrote was, "I understand, and I'm sorry this happened." That was it. But somehow it meant more than a long explanation would have. The divorce got finalized 6 weeks after I packed Keith's suitcase that first night. Colton called me at work to tell me the judge had signed everything. He said it was one of the faster uncontested divorces he'd handled in his career. I asked him if that meant something, and he said it usually meant the other party knew they couldn't defend their behavior if things went to court. Keith never fought the terms we'd agreed to in mediation. He just signed and let it go through. Part of me had expected him to drag it out or try to make things difficult, but he didn't. Maybe his attorney told him he didn't have a case. Maybe he finally realized how bad everything looked written down in legal documents. Natalie and Tom invited me over for dinner the night after the divorce was final. They had champagne and made my favorite pasta dish. We sat around their table and Tom made a toast to better judgment in future relationships. Natalie laughed and said her next friend's husband better be completely boring and appropriate. No more jokes about leaving wives. No more showing up at gyms uninvited. Just normal, boring, appropriate behavior. We all clinked glasses and I felt lighter than I had in months. These were real friends who had my back even when things got messy and uncomfortable. I hadn't lost anything important by leaving Keith. I'd actually gained clarity about what real friendship looked like. Amanda helped me understand something important during one of our therapy sessions. She said I felt lighter now because Keith's constant comments had been designed to keep me insecure. When someone repeatedly tells you they'd leave you for someone else, it makes you grateful they stay. It makes you try harder to be good enough. It keeps you off balance and afraid to stand up for yourself because what if they actually leave? That's emotional manipulation even if the person doing it doesn't realize that's what they're doing. Keith's behavior wasn't about Natalie at all. It was about controlling me by making me feel like I wasn't enough. Understanding that made something click into place in my brain. My sister convinced me to take a weekend trip to the beach with her 2 weeks after the divorce was final. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 2 years because Keith always said we couldn't afford it. We needed to save money for a house eventually. We had to be responsible. But now I was looking at my bank account and realizing I actually had more money than I did when I was married. I wasn't paying for Keith's stuff anymore. I wasn't covering his share when he came up short. The irony wasn't lost on me that being single gave me more freedom and more money than being married ever did. My sister and I drove to the coast and spent 3 days walking on the beach and eating seafood and not talking about Keith at all. It felt like the first real break I'd had in years. A few days after I got back from the beach, I ran into one of Keith's friends at the grocery store. He was standing by the produce section and looked uncomfortable when he saw me. He walked over and said he wanted to apologize for not speaking up about Keith's comments when we were all together. His girlfriend had pointed out how wrong they were, but he hadn't wanted to cause problems at the time. Now he felt bad about staying quiet when he should have said something to Keith privately. I told him I appreciated him saying that and it wasn't his responsibility to fix Keith's behavior, but it meant something that he recognized it was wrong. He nodded and said his girlfriend was right about a lot of things, and he was trying to be better about calling out his friends when they crossed lines. The next week, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Keith asking if we could talk about getting back together because he'd been doing therapy and working on himself. He said he understood now what he did wrong and wanted a chance to show me he'd changed. I stared at the message for about 10 seconds, then blocked the number without responding. His growth wasn't my responsibility anymore, and I didn't owe him a conversation about it. Whatever work he was doing in therapy was for him, not for us, because there was no us anymore. I started redecorating the apartment the following weekend to make it feel like mine instead of ours. Natalie came over with paint samples and we picked out a soft gray-blue color for the bedroom that Keith had always said was too bold. We spent Saturday afternoon painting while music played from my phone and laughing about how such a small change made the whole space feel different. She stood back and looked at the finished wall and said it was perfect, and she couldn't believe Keith had stopped me from doing this years ago. I told her it felt good to make choices without someone shooting them down or making me feel stupid for having preferences. During my next session, Amanda and I worked on recognizing red flags I'd missed early in my relationship with Keith. She had me write down times he made jokes at my expense, then called me sensitive when I objected. The list got long fast and included comments about my cooking, my work, my family, and how I looked in certain outfits. Amanda explained that jokes at someone else's expense aren't actually jokes, and they're designed to make the other person feel small, while the joke teller gets to hide behind humor. I was learning that someone who really cared about me wouldn't want to make me feel bad even as a joke. 3 months after the divorce, I realized I felt genuinely happy instead of just relieved. I was sleeping through the night without waking up anxious. My work performance had gotten better and my boss had noticed. I'd reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage because Keith always had something negative to say about them. My apartment felt peaceful instead of tense, and I could make plans without checking with someone first or worrying about complaints later. One afternoon, Natalie told me Keith had tried to contact her again through a mutual friend. The friend had passed along a message asking if Natalie would be willing to get coffee now that Keith was single. She'd shut it down immediately and told the friend not to pass along any more messages, then blocked Keith on every platform she could think of. I felt sick hearing it, but also validated because it proved his interest in her was never just jokes like he'd claimed. He actually thought now that we were divorced she might be interested, which showed he'd learned nothing. I started going on a few casual dates, but I wasn't rushing into anything serious. Amanda said taking time to rebuild my sense of self outside of marriage was healthy and important. I was enjoying learning who I was without Keith's constant comments about everything I did or said or wore. Dating felt different now because I knew what red flags to watch for, and I wasn't desperate for someone to validate me. My lease ended in late summer, and I moved into a smaller apartment that was entirely mine. My family and friends showed up to help me move boxes and furniture. My dad carried in the last lamp and said he was glad to see me smiling again because I'd looked exhausted during the marriage. My sister agreed and said I seemed lighter now, like I wasn't carrying around stress all the time. The new place was cozy and affordable, and I decorated it exactly how I wanted without anyone telling me my choices were wrong. 2 weeks after the move, I got called into my boss's office and thought something was wrong. Instead, she told me I was getting a promotion I'd been passed over for twice while married to Keith. She said she'd noticed a positive change in my confidence and initiative over the past few months, and the improvement was significant. I thanked her and walked back to my desk, trying not to cry, because I knew exactly why my performance had suffered before. I'd been too anxious and distracted dealing with Keith's behavior to focus properly on work. 6 months after the divorce, Keith sent one final email saying he finally understood what he did wrong, and he was sorry. He wrote 3 paragraphs about his therapy insights, and how he recognized his pattern of making me feel insecure on purpose. He said he hoped I was doing well and he wished things had ended differently. I read the whole thing, felt absolutely nothing, and deleted it because his understanding came too late and wasn't my concern anymore. 2 months later, Natalie and I booked a weekend at a beach resort 3 hours away. We spent the first day lying on the sand reading books and ordering fruity drinks from the poolside bar. That evening, we got dressed up for dinner at a seafood restaurant overlooking the water and talked about everything except Keith until dessert arrived. Natalie set down her fork and looked at me across the table. I need to tell you something. She said she appreciated me believing her about the harassment because too many women have friends who choose their husbands over them in situations like this. Her cousin had gone through something similar and lost her best friend when she spoke up about inappropriate behavior. I reached across and squeezed her hand because I couldn't imagine choosing Keith over her friendship, especially after seeing all those texts. The next morning, we walked along the beach collecting shells, and I realized something that surprised me less than it probably should have. I didn't miss Keith at all. What I missed was the idea of partnership I thought we had, but the reality was me constantly managing his inappropriate behavior and accepting disrespect. I'd spent 2 years making excuses for his comments and convincing myself he didn't mean it that way. The relief I felt without him was proof that the marriage had been exhausting me instead of supporting me. Natalie and I spent the rest of the weekend laughing and making plans for future trips without anyone making us uncomfortable. A year after I packed Keith's suitcase, I was genuinely thriving in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My promotion at work came with a significant raise and new responsibilities I actually enjoyed. My friendship circle had expanded because I wasn't avoiding people Keith didn't like anymore. My apartment felt peaceful when I came home instead of tense with wondering what mood he'd be in. I'd learned that someone repeatedly telling you they'd leave you isn't a joke at all, but a warning you should listen to. Standing up for yourself isn't giving up on a relationship, but finally choosing yourself first, after choosing someone else for too long. I was sleeping better and smiling more and making decisions without second-guessing whether they'd trigger complaints or criticism. My sister commented that I looked younger now than I had during the marriage. My mom said she could hear the difference in my voice when we talked on the phone, The life I was building felt solid and real instead of fragile and conditional.